Hello, everyone.
Greetings.
Your new fancy schmancy platform here.
Yeah, we upgraded since we last saw you, huh?
Wanted all these passwords. It was smart enough to know to keep me out. So.
Oh my gosh. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this HoodMed Chat, a special Let's Get Vaccinated HoodMed Chats crossover episode to answer all of your questions on booster shots, COVID vaccine approval for ages 5 to 11, and how to stay safe this holiday season. My name is Dr. Nisi Hudson, Chair and Science Director of Hood Medicine Initiative.
I'm Jonathan White, co-founder and Director of Policy and Engagement for Hood Medicine.
I'm Doug Slaughter, the Public Health Director for Hood Medicine.
Hood Medicine Initiative is a collective of scientists, physicians, hackers, and assorted geeks focused on addressing health disparities in Black and Brown communities and reducing the spread of dis and misinformation. HoodMed Chats is our signature event. It's an effort to bring expertise of healthcare professionals and others to our communities. Our goal is simple: help us, save us.
Today, we're extremely honored to welcome back one of our VIPs, Dr. Peter J. Hotez, MD, PhD, a professor of pediatrics and molecular virology and microbiology, and the founding dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine, where he's also the co-director of the Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development. Dr. Hotez, it is an honor to see you once again.
I'm the one who's honored, and it's great to be part of HoodMed Chat once again. And thank you for all your extraordinary work during this pandemic.
Thank you.
We should start with a little celebration for Hood Medicine's first publication, written with you and your daughter, Dr. Emily Hotez. It's published in eClinical Medicine, a Lancet journal. It's titled Addressing Disparities for Intersectional BIPOC Communities, the Hood Medicine Initiative Case Study. Super, it was an honor to have the opportunity to publish with you and describe our public health messaging framework. We're just hoping others will be able to use our outreach methods for health equity work.
Well, thanks.
So thank you.
It was also fun to publish with my daughter, Emily, is an assistant professor at UCLA, and she loves working with you. I do too, of course, but she loves working with you guys. She's always saying, "What are we going to do next with HoodMed?" And
she's brilliant,
and she's a brilliant lady, so she knows a good thing when she sees it. So
she takes out her dad.
Yeah, super exciting.
Well, it takes that for a mom, no question about it. She got lucky by getting all the genes from her.
Let's jump into Q&A. First, we'll run through our questions, and then we'll open up for some of the questions from our audience to answer as well. We want to start with the boosters and break it down for everyone. Can you tell us why you think COVID boosters are necessary? We've had a lot of questions lately about whether this means vaccines aren't working. And a lot of people out there pushing this idea of a leaky vaccine or co-opting that idea because it's non-sterilizing. So could you just give us some clarity on why the vaccine boosters are sometimes necessary?
Yeah, and just for transparency, my view tends to be a little more on the militant side for the need for third immunizations than some of my scientific colleagues. So, so I think it's very important that people understand what's my opinion and what's the CDC recommendation. So the CDC recommendation is that fully vaccinated means 2 doses of the either mRNA vaccine or 2 doses of the J&J vaccine. And then they make the comment, in addition, people over a certain age, I believe it's 65, should get the 3rd immunization. Where I differ a little bit is I also believe that everyone who's gotten 2 doses of the mRNA vaccine should get a 3rd immunization. And I base that, and I put up some of the data on my Twitter account so people could see it with the papers that I based it on, from mostly data out of Israel published in the Lancet New England Journal, showing that 3rd immunization really jacks up your virus neutralizing antibodies and will induce likely a more prolonged protective immune response. And then I make the statement that in some ways the both mRNA vaccines, Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna, were always 3-dose vaccines and probably should have been messaged that way. And why do I say that? I say that because the first 2 doses were given 3 to 4 weeks apart. And that was really important to do because if you remember back in January, we were losing healthcare providers, we were losing nursing home residents at an alarming rate. And we wanted to get people quickly immunized. And that was a wise decision and it saved a lot of lives. The point where I depart a little bit is by going down that path, by giving the first 2 doses 3 to 4 weeks apart, you basically bought yourself a 3-dose vaccine because when you give it that close together, the first 2 doses, it almost acts like a primary immunization. And you're going to get declining immunity in 6 months to a year. And sure enough, that's what you get. But once you give that 3rd dose, then it really revs up your virus neutralizing antibodies 30 to 40 fold, gives you longer lasting protection. So I think the mistake was that should have been messaged better from the beginning. I said it, but it wasn't necessarily reinforced by the White House and other sources that, there should have been a stronger messaging. Hey, we're giving these 2 doses now, but don't be surprised if the call comes to get a 3rd dose in 6 months to a year. And I think, there should have been a better way to set expectations. And I say all this based on our experience with pediatric vaccines. So what do we do with our kids, right? Whether you vaccinate, as infants, when you vaccinate them against almost doesn't matter what, diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, polio, Haemophilus influenza, type B, what we do is we give a series of rapid immunizations a few weeks apart, then you wait, and then you wait 6 months to a year, and then you boost. And then you don't need to vaccinate again often for 5 years, sometimes 10 years. And I think the mRNA vaccines are going by that same playbook. So you always have to be really careful when you hear someone publicly disagreeing with CDC. It's not so much that I'm publicly disagreeing. I just think that there's a bit of nuance here, and that is the current recommendation is everyone over the age of 65 should get the 3rd immunization, and any adult 18 to 65 may get the 3rd immunization. And I would make that stronger. I would have said every adult should get a 3rd immunization. And I think that's a simpler message, and I think it's backed by the science.
So essentially, what you're postulating is those first 2 doses we received, because they were so close, sort of act as 1 dose in some sense, rather than the 2 doses. And typically, with most vaccinations, those would have been spread out even more, except that we were in a global pandemic and
we were in a crisis. Yeah. So given the circumstances, the decision to space 3 to 4 weeks apart and design the trials that way, it was a wise decision, but it meant that you were going to make a 3-dose vaccine, and that part could have been made clear. And then the next question always follows is, hey, wait, does this mean now we're going to do this? We're going to do this dance every year now, and get boosters every year? I actually don't think so. So it won't be so much 1 and done and 2 and done, but 3 and done, I think. And then we may not need to get vaccinated for a while after that. We don't know for certain, again, because we don't have enough experience with the mRNA technology. But I think that could be it. I'm hoping that after you get your 3rd immunization, that could be done for a while.
Great. So can you repeat again, who should be looking to get booster shots at this point in time? Should everyone out there be looking to get a booster shot if they have passed the timeline for
I think so, but the way the CDC phrases it is everyone over the age of 65 definitely, because we're seeing all these breakthrough hospitalizations. But I also would recommend it, and they say may get it between 18 and 65. I thought that was too nuanced and not worded as well as I would have liked. I'm basically saying everyone who's eligible to get a 3rd immunization, get it when you're 6 months out or more. And especially now with this Delta wave, looks like it's coming back across the country. So we got hit hard here in the South over the summer, and a lot of sick young people as well. especially those who 85% of the hospitalizations and deaths were among the unvaccinated. But now that this wave is going to sweep across the country yet again this winter, I predict, and it's starting already in Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin, get that third immunization. We have the vaccines, you have the eligibility. And then I'm asked also about which one should I get, doc? That's the next question. And here, and I know there's the CDC has said, hey, you can mix and match any way you wish. Here's what I would recommend. So when I got let me take you through each one: Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J. So when I got the first 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. I could have gotten any one I want for that third immunization. I chose Pfizer again, and the reason is because the companies will collect a lot more data on their own booster, what we call a homologous boost, than a heterologous boost for which the company has no incentive to collect data on. So, why would Pfizer now start collecting data on the Moderna boost? They won't. And I don't think that our government has done a good enough job of collecting vaccine effectiveness data. So I think in terms of efficacy, if it is time to get a booster later on, or safety, you'll have a lot more information if you stick with what you started with. So the bottom line is, if you got 2 doses of Pfizer, I'm suggesting stay with Pfizer. If you got 2 doses of the Moderna, I'm suggesting get the 3rd dose of Moderna, and remember that 3rd dose is half the level. J&J is a little more nuanced. With the J&J vaccine, it's I always thought that was a 2-dose vaccine, looking at the virus neutralizing antibody data. And the truth is, with the booster for the J&J, it's a bit different. It's not that the immune response is waning or going down. It's just that it was never as robust as it could have been to begin with if you'd gotten 2 doses instead of 1 dose. So a bit of a difference. So generally speaking, I think a 2-dose J&J vaccine's a good vaccine. I think the only wiggle room in terms of getting a different booster is if you're at risk for clotting events, because there is that very rare cerebral thrombosis that can occur. And the two most common populations at greater risk of thrombosis are being pregnant or on birth control pills. So basically, pretty much any young woman of reproductive age may want to switch over from J&J to one of the mRNA vaccines. And even then, that's kind of a soft call. And I say that because when you look at the actual data, the risk of cerebral thrombosis seems to be the highest with the first dose and much lower with the second dose. So even that's a bit squishy. So that's about the only time I would recommend seriously considering a switch. And so I think, the freedom to mix and match, if we were limited in what vaccines were available, that would be an important message. But we're not. In the U.S., we've got an abundance of different vaccines we can get. I think that could have been explained a little bit better either. Basically, stick with what you started with the possible exception of the J&J if you're in an at-risk category.
Really quick question as a follow-up. So the J&J vaccine, there was some commentary about that, saying that it was actually meant to be a 2-dose vaccine, and they put it out as a 1-dose vaccine for ease's sake and to get more people vaccinated. Do you believe in that theory as well?
Well, I think what happened, I don't know. I mean, looking at the phase 1, phase 2 data, I said, wow, as a 2-dose vaccine, this looks really good. In some ways, as good or better than the mRNA vaccine. So I was surprised when it came out as the single dose. I think, and I don't know what exactly happened. They may have been under some pressure globally because we still need to vaccinate billions of people, and so maybe it was that global pressure to focus on a single dose that kind of drove that indication. But to me, it always looked like a 2-dose vaccine, and it's not bad as a single dose vaccine based on the original criteria. If that's all we had was a single dose J&J vaccine, we would still be pretty happy with it. So it's not important not to get too bent out of shape about it, but I think as a 2-dose vaccine, it's superior.
And as a sort of segue to globally, folks who had the AstraZeneca vaccine in some of the Caribbean and other areas, is there a Pfizer or Moderna vaccine? Do you suggest them get either the Pfizer or Moderna one? Which one do you think they should try to get it?
There is some data suggesting waning immunity with the 2 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. And then the question is, what do you boost with? And I don't know if there's an official recommendation because we don't have that vaccine license in the US. But, generally speaking, there are limits to the number of times you can boost with adenovirus vectored vaccines. By that, I mean the J&J, the AstraZeneca, Sputnik V, or the CanSino Bio from China. And the reason is because you start making an immune response to the adenovirus vector part, so it'll limit its efficacy. And so on that basis, I think most people might say for the 3rd dose, you probably want to switch. The only one we have data on, because both the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer vaccine are used in the UK. So the UK did a study looking at mix and match of AstraZeneca, Pfizer. On that basis, I'd probably go with Pfizer because you have the supporting data. The other thing is our vaccine, our recombinant protein vaccine. I think that's going to be a good booster, and we're actually looking at that now. We're hoping it'll be released soon for emergency use authorization. We licensed it to Biological E in India, where it's known as Corbevax, and they're actually looking at it as a booster for Covishield, which is the AstraZeneca vaccine made in India. So that'll be interesting to see if there's data to support that.
Speaking of the UK,
by the way, if you're looking at this and your head is spinning and confused as hell, it's okay. It's not you. It's just remember, we got a lot of vaccines out in a short period of time, and we're on the steep learning curve, and so there's a lot of data dump in a short period of time, and so it's totally understandable if you're a bit confused. But the bottom line is, generally speaking, stick with what you started with a couple of nuanced exceptions.
yeah, thanks for synthesizing that. I know it can be overwhelming at times, so I think it's key to kind of interpret that a little bit. You mentioned the UK as we were talking about the AstraZeneca vaccine. Right now we're seeing really alarming spikes in Europe as a whole and in Asia. We knew that another wave was inevitable just because of the difficulties and committing to actual containment measures, but do you suspect that we may have any new variants at play as well?
I don't think the new variants are so far a big player at this point. And as I like to say, Delta is the king of all variants, or the queen of all variants in terms of transmissibility. So, the good news is I don't think we have to worry about new other variants right now. The bad news is Delta is sort of a nightmare scenario in terms of its high level of transmissibility. So people ask me, hey, what the heck's going on in Austria, for instance? Why are they threatening to go on lockdown? Look at that. 65% of the country is, quote, fully vaccinated. I said, that's really high. And I said, well, no, it's not really. So first of all, it's only a few percentage points higher than the US, which is, going to hit 59, 60%. And what that means is 35% of Austria is not vaccinated, and that's what this virus is mostly tearing through, because that's still a lot of people, and we need to get up to 85% to think about halting transmission. And again, this gets back to what 2 doses means. I think we are seeing a lot of breakthrough infections and some breakthrough hospitalizations. So that's why we need to ramp it up to 3 doses. And then we may not have to go much after that. So for me, if we're serious about halting transmission, it's a pretty high bar. Using the vaccine to halt transmission, I think 85% of the population is going to need to be vaccinated. And I think we've unfortunately had to move the goalpost on what it means for fully immunized. 3 doses for the 2 mRNA and 2 doses for the J&J, with the full disclosure that that's not how the CDC defines it yet.
Sure. So, as of yesterday, here in the U.S., about 70% of the population has been vaccinated, and 60% have had
70% of adults. So six in the U.S.
adults. True, in the U.S. Yeah,
It's about 59% of the total U.S. population.
yeah, and
And
then
that's what the
about,
virus. And remember, that's what the virus is looking at. It's not looking at this. Hey, are you an adult or a
I
kid?
know, right?
It's non-discriminatory. So.
Totally. Let's say like 60% have had at least one dose. So, do you think the push for boosters now, along with kids' vaccines, will get us to where we need to be to save off a new wave, or will we have to
Yeah,
line up our?
if
Yeah,
people accept it, but we
right. Exactly.
unfortunately we've got a lot of negative forces at play. First of all, among the adults, we're just seeing too much defiance and refusal. Some of it in the BIPOC community. I think more of it, with people with this allegiance to conservatism and the misbelief that taking ivermectin is good as getting a COVID vaccine, which we know is ridiculous. So
Absurd.
remember what we have to do. So we've got a gap of around 85, 90 million Americans to vaccinate. So we're 58. We have to get to 85. So what is that? That's, roughly, 25, 30% of the US population. We still have to start vaccinating. And that's what we need. And so how do we get there? When you've got so many people who are defiant of getting vaccinations. And by the way, this is a killer. This defiance. Here in Texas, my back of the envelope calculation based on Institute for Health Metrics data, together with some of the data collected by the Texas Health Department, says since June 1, 2021, June 1 this year, 20,000 Texans who were unvaccinated lost their lives. They
Mm.
they lost their lives despite the availability of vaccines, refused to do it. I said, I don't even know what words to use to describe that. It's people call it misinformation, disinformation. I call it self-immolation
Mm.
or anti-science aggression, and this is a killer force. On that basis, I say anti-science aggression, mostly from the political right, is maybe the single leading killer of young people in the United States right now. That's how bad it's gotten. And so that's going to be figuring that out is going to be critical to close the gap. We still, have, just started vaccinating little kids. And even among the adolescents, only about a third of the adolescents are being vaccinated in the South for those similar reasons. Parents are holding back. And then for the younger kids, I think there's a mixture of forces. I think some of it is the same kind of defiance, the same reason they wouldn't vaccinate their adolescents. They're not going to vaccinate their little kids. I think more of it, though, is just people are holding back and waiting to see what happens and making certain there's no untoward safety signal. I don't think there will be. And I think as more and more kids start to get vaccinated, it's going to be self-perpetuating and more people will get their kids vaccinated. I also think part of it is because, when that emergency use authorization happened for little kids, the cases had gone way down and they weren't going up again like they are now. But now that it's going up, I think that's going to be an issue.
Dr. Hotez, we have a couple of audience questions. There's one about boosters for pregnant women. Genevieve McDaniels asks, what is the best timing for a pregnant woman to get her booster past some antibodies to fetus? I'm getting mine tomorrow at 29 weeks and hoping that's laden. What would you say to her?
Yeah, that's a good question. I should ask my maternal fetal medicine colleagues for confirmation. I would say definitely in the third trimester, to maximize neutralizing antibody. But quite honestly, if you've not been vaccinated for 6 months, you may want to do it sooner than that in order to protect yourself as well, because the major indication for vaccinating during pregnancy is still to protect the mother, right? And there's the added benefit that some virus neutralizing antibodies can be passed on to the infant. So ideally, probably in the third trimester would be best in order to pass those antibodies on. But have that conversation with your obstetrician. And if it's been a while since you've got your first 2 doses, you may need to make a decision about vaccinating sooner than that to protect yourself, and that's going to be the most important, because the data on passing virus neutralizing antibodies to the baby, I think it's real. It definitely happens, but we don't have the full understanding of that data. So I think it's important to protect mom first and foremost.
You dove a
But
little bit
that's a discussion you should have with your OB, and who are on top of the ACOG recommendations, American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and the Maternal Fetal Medicine Society. So I don't want to say anything that's at variance with what the information they're putting out.
You dove a little bit into the waters where parents are now trying to decide whether or not to vaccinate their young children. Can you walk us through the basics of the approval process for the kids' vaccine in an effort to sort of reassure parents who have concerns about the safety and efficacy of the vaccine for children from 5 to 11?
Yeah, sure. So it was based on a study of 1,500 kids who got the vaccine, and I think half of that number who was randomized to a placebo, so 2,200 kids. So not a tiny study, but not a huge study either, and it showed it was over 90% protective. The one thing that's often giving parents some hesitancy is we know that the highest rates of myocarditis that we're seeing in the 16 to 29-year-old male adults, it's about 1 in 10,000. So by having 1,500 little kids who got the vaccine, that doesn't approach the 1 in 10,000 necessarily to see a myocarditis signal. So some parents are kind of holding off, waiting till more kids get vaccinated to make certain that it's not even higher in the young kids than it is in the adolescents and in the young adult males. I don't think it's going to be an issue. Here's why. One, I think we started to see the numbers of myocarditis cases actually go down when we went from the young adults to the adolescents somewhat. And remember, the dose of RNA in the vaccine is much lower in the young kids, about a third as much. So I don't think myocarditis is going to be a big issue in the young kids, but we haven't seen all of the data yet. They should be coming out with some revised data soon, because now we've got many more kids that have been vaccinated than 1,500. So if my kids were young, between the ages of 5 and 11, or if I were a grandparent of a kid between the ages of 5 and 11, I would strongly recommend getting the vaccine.
We had a question from Zach Krog, and it sort of is based on what you just said about the sample size of the kid study. He's wondering if that's good enough, a good enough size of a trial for him to base any decisions off of.
Yeah, and that's why I say I think we already know, that there's many more kids that have been vaccinated by now. So that if we were going to see a safety signal, you would have seen it by now. One of the things that I've, informally suggested to parents that you might consider is, the rate of myocarditis in the young adults went up much more after the second dose. So, if you're having real questions and concerns, you can get the first dose now, and then we'll have more data in the coming weeks regarding the second dose, but at least you're not starting from zero by now. So in other words, get the first dose now, and then 3 weeks from now, there may be more data available. Then you can go ahead and get the second dose, or decide you want to wait a week or two later, which which probably won't be deleterious, might even give you a better immune response. But at least then, you're not sitting back and waiting while your child's at greater risk of COVID-19. Because remember, COVID-19 little kids is a bad actor, despite what some of the anti-vaccine people are saying. And then you can just move ahead with the second dose. And I think that might kind of an intermediate strategy that some people find fairly satisfying. But, again, that's not been any kind of official policy from the CDC.
Related to that, Dr. Hotez, there's an audio question that I'll read and then follow up with what I'd like to pull out of that. Victoria Lynn Shaw Nelson had a question. She has children under 5, and she wants to know Is there any update for kids under 5? My 5-year-old got her first this week, but I have 1-year-old that I'm still anxious to get vaccinated. Can you tell us a little bit
Yeah,
about
I think
trials?
Tony Fauci earlier this week or last week said he thinks potentially by the end of the year or early next year it'll be released for emergency use. With younger kids, they tend to be there's there's often more they're a bit more cautious. So I think that's the status of where we're at right now. So I don't see anything happening before the end of the year, but the end of the year is coming soon.
And then we have
By the way, if
yeah.
you live near a major medical center, there's a good likelihood that there's a clinical trial underway for young kids. So here at Baylor College of Medicine, when I walk in the front door in the morning, I'm often seeing a bunch of little kids with their parents, and that's because they've been enrolled in clinical trials, and so there's that option as well.
Gotcha. So we have another question that's a little more nuanced, maybe from Becky Mai. She's referencing infectious disease experts from UCSF talking about sort of delaying the dose, like they've done in other countries, from the Pfizer from 3 weeks to 6 to 8. That in response to early studies indicate that delay might increase the vaccine's efficacy and also might reduce the myocarditis risk. So what do you think about extending sort of the timeline between doses?
Well, I haven't heard it about reducing the myocarditis risk, but it's kind of interesting. So, I mean, remember what happened in Canada? The Canadian government didn't do a great job procuring enough vaccine, so they had a policy where they immunized everyone with a single dose, and then much later vaccinated with a second dose, not by choice, but just by that circumstance, and it looks like it is holding up a little bit better as a consequence. So they don't have that same urgency to give the third immunization, but I think eventually it will wane, and they'll have to do that as well. But the problem is this: when you look at the efficacy data for a single dose, I think it was the Pfizer vaccine against the Delta variant, it was only about 30%. So, during that window period between the first and even though after getting 2 doses spaced further apart, it'll have longer lasting protection. You have that greater vulnerability between the first and second dose because the first dose against Delta is not that great.
Melinda Gwynn, asks, when will boosters be available for adolescents who were vaccinated earlier in the summer?
Yeah, I think that should come as we collect data on and find evidence for waning immunity among the 12 to 17-year-olds. So I don't know when that's going to come about, possibly before the end of the year.
Interesting. Are there any special considerations for the boosters for kids between 12 and 17?
I think the one thing people would be concerned about would be, again, the myocarditis issue and making certain that that's not exacerbated and there's not a higher rate. Although some preliminary data out of Israel says that the rate of myocarditis after the third dose is not as high after the second, but that's a bit of a soft call. I haven't seen really, it's more anecdotal than anything else.
Jennifer Dellen, this is a perfect question. It's halfway joking, I'm sure, but I know a lot of parents have asked this. Can I pass my very tall, almost 4-year-old off as a 5-year-old to get him protected? But seriously, though, I'm just anxious to get approvals for my younger kids. We had a lot of questions with people asking about, if their kids are bigger in weight, does it matter? Does the age really matter more than like their body size? Or like if my kid is like, on the cusp of turning that age, especially for like the 10-year-olds, I guess, or like they're 11-year-olds, they're wondering, should I wait for the birthday so they can get the adult dose, or should I just give them the kid dose right now? Can we kind of help the parents?
Well, one thing about vaccines is that you don't see that same kind of dose response curve like you do small molecule drugs, right? So, for instance, if you notice with the Moderna vaccine, the boost is half as much. So there's this phenomenon in immunology known as fractional dosing, where paradoxically, for boosters, you can actually get a better immune response with a lower dose. And it's all based on empiric observation and testing. So just because your child is younger getting a lower dose does not mean they're getting an inferior vaccine. It's still probably holding up really well, especially after the booster. So I wouldn't worry about that. I think, in terms of going below the age of 5, or going rogue in terms of younger age groups. I know the FDA director was pretty emphatic. Don't do this at home. Don't try to um, go around this, because when you're looking at safety in kids, you really have to be pretty pristine about it. So hopefully we'll have that data soon.
Great.
There's been some comments and recommendations on immunocompromised people lately regarding a third dose. There's actually you spoke a little bit about this at the beginning of the episode, but we have a audience question on this with respect to children. So Kristen Blick asks, any word on a third shot for immunocompromised 5 to 11-year-olds? My 6-year-old takes immunosuppressant, and we're wondering if it's worth it to draw titers 2 weeks after her second dose, or just wait and see what the recommendation is for a third shot for her age group.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I haven't seen any information about immunocompromised kids. And some kids are more immunocompromised than others, depending on what the nature of the immunosuppression is. With, for instance, the solid organ transplant adults at the greatest risk. So hopefully that information will come soon. The problem with measuring antibody titers, and this is coming, I can't tell you how many times I'm getting a question. Hey, doc, this is my titer that I got. The problem is this: all of those tests were designed to measure antibody to the virus and infection. They're not specifically set up to measure the spike protein in the vaccine. So no one really knows what those commercially available tests mean in terms of antibodies to the spike protein. In fact, some of the commercial kits don't measure antibody to the spike protein at all. They measure antibody to the nucleocapsid antigen, and as a result, you'll have a false negative. It's a real negative. It's just that you got immunized with the spike protein, not the N protein. So the reliability of those commercial tests for antibody to measure past infection, it's not clear what the numbers mean in terms of how effective whether the vaccine took or not. So I'd be really careful with that. So here at Baylor College of Medicine, one of our faculty members, Tony Piedra, is doing a specific study with a specially designed ELISA antibody test to measure specifically to the vaccine spike protein. So unless you're doing this at a medical center, you don't really know what those numbers mean. And the other problem is the different kits are not harmonized. And so some use numbers on a scale of 1 to 100, others use a scale to 1 to 1,000. So somebody says, hey, doc, I got a number of 29. I say, look, it has, and they don't know what test was used. I said, it has no meaning to me because we don't know what specific kit was used and that kind of thing. And I think probably FDA kind of issued an advisory about that, and it kind of got lost. I think they may want to clarify that more because everybody's getting antibodies measured using past, the infection assay in order to make decisions about the third immunization, and you shouldn't, because I don't think anybody can really interpret it with regard to the vaccine.
That's great information, Dr. Hotez. For immunocompromised adults, can you explain the CDC recommendation for those individuals to get 3 full doses before their booster?
Yeah, well, I guess, right now, I don't think anyone's talking about a fourth immunization, but the recommendation is go get your booster once you've passed a certain time frame. And it's pretty much the same as the booster recommendation for everyone else. The difference being, so for Pfizer, it's 3 doses. For the Moderna, the only difference is the booster shot is not the 50 micrograms, it's the full dose.
Okay.
And that, seems to be restoring high levels of protective immunity in most individuals. There are individuals who are on specific immunosuppressive therapies that are just not responding to any of the doses of the vaccine. I just heard the other day about a colleague who's a renal transplant and on a specialty monoclonal antibody treatment where she can't respond to the vaccine. So she's getting monoclonal infusions every month. And so if you are, chances are, if you're severely immunocompromised and you're on immunosuppressive therapy, you're being followed either by a hematologist, oncologist, or a rheumatologist or an allergist, and they have training in knowing about the response to vaccines, and that's the person you want to depend on. You're going to go to for your guidance.
There's some concern about the holidays coming up. There was a question in the chat about someone from New England who's concerned about bringing together multiple households for Thanksgiving. Some adults vaccinated, some boosted. Can you give some tips for planning a safe holiday? People need to hold off on large gatherings again this year. How would you advise individuals?
So first of all, number one, COVID nationally is going back up again. Second, be mindful where you live. So, if you're, the decision you make in Minnesota may be different from Texas. So, Minnesota right now, where things are on fire, or Michigan, you probably want to be more judicious and careful about a larger gathering than you might in Texas. Overall, I would say if you can keep the gathering modest, that's better than a big event. So so one, be mindful of your circumstances. Know what your community level of transmission is. Second, broad strokes. I mean, we're not asking you to become an epidemiologist overnight, but just have a sense of what's happening in your community. Second, I would try to keep the gathering modest. And exactly what modest is hard to say. But the fewer people, the safer it's going to be. Third, you want to ask everybody who's coming into your home that if they're fully vaccinated, you want them fully vaccinated. Now, not a lot of people are going to have 3 doses, but at least 2 doses. That's a big difference, and that's what you want to encourage. And of course, if the kids are young kids, between the ages of 5 and 11, chances are by now at most they'll have a single dose, and if they're under 5, they're not going to be vaccinated at all. But again, keeping that modest size, and basically anyone who's eligible to be vaccinated in your home should be vaccinated. Next, if you can do an outdoor gathering, that's always better. This time of year for a lot of the country, it's cold. In the southern part, you might be able to have that outside. That's always better. If not, if you're doing it in your home, try to keep the door open, keep it as well ventilated as possible. So those are the kinds of things to think about.
One last question for you, Dr. Hotez, and we appreciate all the time you spend with us. Regarding the BIPOC communities, particularly the Black community, we see from the data available, there's about 11% of people getting vaccinated are from the Black community, about 17% from the Hispanic community or Latin community, but uptick is slowed to about 7% over the last 14 days or so for people in the Black community. What do you think needs to be done?
So let me understand that a little bit better. So if you're talking about 11%,
yes, that's up until now.
Are you saying that even though the African American community is about 13% of the U.S. population, only 11% have been vaccinated?
No, let me say it differently. 11% of the people who have been vaccinated are from the Black community.
Okay. So it's slightly underrepresenting what you hope for,
yes.
right?
And over the last 14 or so days, that number drops to about 7%. 7% of the people who have been vaccinated over the last 2 weeks are from the Black community. So it seems like there's a drop in folks from that community who are getting vaccinated. What's happening? What are we not doing to address the issues that are present there to get people more vaccinated in those communities?
Well, one of the problems nationally, of course, is people still erroneously think we're out of this now. They're seeing the numbers come down, and they're not paying attention to the thing going up, and that's what I'm worried about. We've had about a 25% increase over the last week or two, and that in itself doesn't necessarily throw me. What throws me is this. Mother Nature gave us a pretty bad epidemic in the summer of 2020 in the South, and she repeated it right on cue, the same time frame, same location in 2021. So when I see the uptick and I see that it's happening in the upper Midwest, I'm like, uh-oh, that's exactly what happened this time last year. So it worries me that she's telling us that she's going to give us a pretty bad winter wave across the country, and people aren't paying attention to that. Now, you don't know that for certain, but, and then Tony Fauci calls it an uptick. I'm thinking that could be more than an uptick. This could be another pretty bad winter wave, because, again, we've only got, I was with Chuck Todd and MSNBC, because, Peter, you got, almost 60% of the country vaccinated. And I go, yeah, you only got almost 60% of the country vaccinated. That's the problem. 40% is not. And that's what we got to fix. So there's just too many unvaccinated people out there, and allowing this thing, whatever metaphor you want to use, to catch fire, to ignite, to create critical mass, and so I think we're in for a really tough winter yet again.
Yeah, I think we are. I really hope that people sort of take your words to heart and heed your message, because,
well, 2/3 of the country does. One third of the country.
Yeah, we know about
that's
them.
nothing to do with me or worse. But
we've already blocked several trolls today. So.
Oh, really? Yeah, even on this one, huh?
Yeah, this is a great platform, because you
I
can
always
straight
think
up
this
like block them
platform
right in the middle.
I always think this platform self-selects for enlightened individuals, but I guess.
We joked the other day that we love working with you, but now that we are, it's just like your trolls are our trolls.
Well, you're welcome to them.
We know how to handle them.
Yeah,
that's
for sure. You get blocked. But thank you so much for joining us again. We're so happy that we had a chance to answer people's questions with the new developments and kids' vaccines, because in as much as we had, a lot of trouble, getting people to overcome their hesitancy for themselves, we might.
Yeah, it's just
the same thing with the kids.
It's just a lot of information and a lot of confusing messaging. And by the way, just looking at CNN or MSNBC, and my wife will, say, "Did you see what so and so said?" So even among, the medical correspondents and my colleague, I'm not listed formally as a medical correspondent for either network, but among my colleagues who are really good, they'll sometimes say something at marked variance from the kinds of things I'm putting out. So, that also tends to create confusion, because we're not always in total agreement. And so that's also a problem sometimes.
And just like the complexity of the immune system, and just in the questions we had today, there's so much nuance with, like, depending on your, medical background, et cetera. So we can't stress enough to ask your doctors and your pediatricians all of these questions as well.
Yeah, I mean, especially, pediatricians, remember, part of a significant part of their training is around vaccines. So they are vaccine experts, and have a low threshold for having that conversation with your
My kid's pediatrician just recommended we get our daughter vaccinated yesterday, so we were thankful to hear that.
Yeah, no, the pediatrician, we got this. I'm trained as a pediatrician as well, and that's a significant part. That's the reason I went into pediatrics. I knew I wanted to be a vaccine scientist, but I wanted some clinical training. I thought, which specialty is sort of vaccine friendly, and clearly pediatrics was the one. So.
Awesome.
We want to thank you, Dr. Hotez, for joining us tonight, or today, actually. Thank everybody for tuning in to our Hood Medicine chat discussion. This was a very important discussion. At Hood Medicine, we want to bring you trusted individuals like Dr. Hotez to provide you with the facts and information to allow you to make the decisions necessary to keep you and your family safe, particularly around this holiday season. Please continue to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to support our effort, donate to our cause, and find out about our next events. Visit hoodmedicine.org or at hood_medicine on IG and Twitter. Hood Medicine Initiative, all one word, on Facebook. Thank you again. Stay safe, and please get vaccinated and take care of your families. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, guys.
Happy
Happy
holidays.
holidays, everyone.
Thank you.